Hello! Let's continue our conversation on Stoicism, going over the moral letters by Seneca. The next letter, I wanted to do letter number 39, which I think was an interesting one, and it's not super long, so I do want to read the whole letter, and then we'll discuss it. From Seneca to Lucilius, greetings. I will indeed put together the manuals you request, carefully ordered and compressed to narrow scope, but it may be that you would benefit more from a regular course of study than from what is now commonly called a breviarium. Back when we spoke real Latin, it was called a summarium. I find these kinds of comments really funny because we complain these days of nobody speaks English properly anymore, nobody does this. And here, like a long time ago, people were complaining about the same thing. That's amazing about these letters. They read as if they were written yesterday. It's fascinating. Anyway, we need the one more while we are learning, the other while we already know, when we already know, sorry. For the one teaches, the other reminds, but I will supply you with both. Okay, I don't have a clue what he's talking about. Some sort of manual, probably about Stoic living, right? Where you and I are concerned, there is no reason to request any particular author. Only the unknown man supplies a voucher. I shall write what you want me to in my own fashion. Meanwhile, you have plenty of others available whose writings will keep you in line well, though, I suppose. Just pick up an index of the philosophers. That itself will rouse you to exertion. Once you see how many have labored on your behalf, you will yearn to be one of them yourself. For this is the best trait of a noble nature. It is inspired by honorable examples. No man of exalted character takes pleasure in what is base and sordid. It is the sight of greatness that attracts and elevates him. Just as a flame leaps upward and cannot be flattened, let alone made to rest, so our minds are always in motion, and the more vigorous ones are all the more lively and active. But it is a fortunate person who directs his energy towards the good. He will place himself outside the jurisdiction of fortune. He will moderate prosperity, minimize adversity, and scorn things that others admire. Greatness of spirit despises great wealth. It prefers moderate means to abundance, for moderation is useful and life-giving, while abundance harms a person through excess. It is like a yield of wheat that is so heavy it flattens the stalks, like a load of fruit that breaks the branches, like livestock that bear too many young for all to reach maturity. That happens with minds too, when they are spoiled by immoderate prosperity, which they use to the detriment of others and even to their own. What enemy has ever treated anyone as roughly as some people's pleasures treat them? Their desires are uncontrolled, insane, and would be unforgivable except that the damage is all to themselves. And it's not without reason that they are tormented with such frenzy, for desires that exceed the bounds of nature cannot but go on to infinity. Our nature has its own limit, but empty and perverse desires are inherently unbounded. Our needs are measured by utility. Beyond that, what line is there to draw? So they drown themselves in pleasures, having grown so accustomed to them that they can no longer do without them. They're especially miserable in that they have gotten to a point where what were once luxuries have become necessities. Rather than enjoying their pleasures, they are slaves to them. Worst of all, they even love what is worst in themselves. The worst of their condition is when they not only enjoy their shameful behavior, but even approve of it. Once vice becomes a code of conduct, there ceases to be any possibility of a cure. I thought this was a very interesting letter, and he discusses some interesting things. He starts off by saying something like, well, let yourself be guided by the philosophers. Look into the philosophers until you have this manual I'm going to write you. You can do that. You can read that. Now, what that comes down to for me is find yourself a mentor. And I believe that is one of the most important things in life. I recently was invited by our science student society to talk. They had a sort of a career event where people from different fields came to speak to the students, and they asked me to say something too. So I said something about entering grad school, what grad school is like. And at the end, one of the students asked me a question, and she asked, so what advice do you have for getting into grad school and that sort of stuff? I'm not sure what that sort of stuff meant, but getting into grad school depends on a number of things, of course, intelligence and, in my mind, resilience, perseverance, grace under pressure. All these things are important, but she was asking more about, and so it seemed, about the whole career perspective, getting into grad school and then what? And so I said at that point, and I because that's what I firmly believe, put your career in the hands of a good mentor. That will make all the difference. You may be shocked at what you're able to achieve if you put your career in the hands of a good mentor. And that sounds like it could be an offensive thing to say, but it applies to me. I have been very, very fortunate in some of the mentors I have had. And it is because of them that I have achieved what I have achieved today, whatever that is. But I'm fairly happy with what I've achieved today. But I mean, but that's due to mentors. So in other words, find a good mentor, and that can also be someone you've never met. One of my mentors, scientifically speaking, is Eric Kandel, who is a Nobel Prize winner, who I think has done absolutely groundbreaking research. I've never met him, but the way he acts in interviews, for example, to me makes him a mentor. For example, at some point he was asked about graduate students. Now understand that it's quite common if you have a lot of research money, which he does as a Nobel Prize laureate. He's won all sorts of research grants. He was asked about grad students, and most people of that stature can have a lot of grad students at the same time and will have postdocs co-supervise them and all that kind of stuff. But he said, I only take on one grad student at a time. And the interviewer, you could see his face go, only one? And Eric Kandel said, yeah. Because then otherwise I can't give them enough attention, which I think is an amazing thing. Anyway, that was not truly what I wanted to talk about, because I've talked about mentors in a previous video. What I found very interesting is when he starts to talk about the opposite of virtue, which is vice. He gets into vice. And he's quite explicit. What enemy has ever treated anyone as roughly as some people's pleasures treat them? Their desires are uncontrolled, insane, and will be unforgivable, except that the damage is all to themselves. For desires that exceed the bounds of nature cannot but go on to infinity. And then, our nature has its own limit, but empty and perverse desires are inherently unbounded. Our needs are measured by utility. Beyond that, what line is there to draw? So they drown themselves in pleasure, having grown so accustomed to them they can no longer do without them. Easy to say, by the way, for someone who was a millionaire like Seneca. But having said that, he did write at some point that he would sometimes rob himself of the luxuries in his own life, that he would take cold baths, or that he would only eat bread for a day, dry bread, only drink water. He would sleep on a hard pallet, etc., like these kinds of things. But I found the allusion to pleasures and perverse pleasures very interesting, because we live in a world where we have a lot of interesting pleasures, let's put it that way, available to us, basically like that, right? And that could be anything. That could be recreational drugs. That could be alcohol, which is a recreational drug no matter how you look at it. It's psychotropic stuff. Anyway, whether that is sexual things, whether there's all kinds of things, we have all that very much within our reach. And we have to strike a balance in how we use all of that, right? And I find that always a very interesting question of how how well are we able to do that? Often, not well. Look at the excesses that are published all the time that say politicians engage in, or actors or singers or whatever. It's very interesting that we struggle so much with moderation, and I think this is one clear aspect where so I'm just looking outside. Someone is a parking lot with a curve. Someone had ample space but made the most awkward turn ever and nearly hit a parked car. Everything's fine, but it was interesting. We have to find that moderation, and that finding that moderation is very difficult. And I think that this is an important misunderstanding about Stoicism that people sometimes have of, if you want to be a Stoic, you have to live as an ascetic. But that's not true. Seneca was a millionaire, definitely did not live as an ascetic, although indeed he had his moments where he would, take the cold baths and just eat bread. But I mean, all the other days he was just a millionaire, right? So I mean, that's not saying that you have to let go of everything. Even the Cynics, who are even more hardcore than the Stoics in that regard, would definitely do things like masturbate in public or have sex in public because they didn't care. I'm not advocating that, for the record. But as I was saying, it's important to strike that balance and to realize that Stoicism is not about you may never enjoy food, you may never enjoy sex, you may never enjoy... That's not what the Stoics claim. However, everything in moderation, and I think it's very interesting how Seneca puts that. Their desires are uncontrolled, insane, and would be unforgivable except that the damage is all to themselves. And that's it, isn't it? You can engage in all these things to extreme levels, but at the end of the day, you are the one who suffers. You are the one who reaps the rewards from excessively indulgent behavior. And that's where things go awry. And here I think we have the Stoic idea of the indifference, where certain things like indulgent food, like alcohol, like sex, they're indifferent. They can just be treated as preferred indifference. You may enjoy all these things, just not at the cost of virtue, not to such a degree that whatever you indulge in becomes problematic, because then you're no longer being virtuous. You're engulfed in something that just keeps going and going, and that is consuming you at the cost of other things, whatever, your health, relationships, whatever. Anyway, that's what I was thinking as I was reading this letter. And this is another demonstration kind of what I was talking about last time. Stoicism is hard, right? Everything in moderation is hard, can be difficult. We can struggle with these things. But we do have to pace ourselves if we want to not get distracted by all those things we can engage in. And that's what I have. Let me know what you think about this letter, about what Seneca wrote, and everything else. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for watching. I'll gladly see you again next week for more talk about Stoicism. Bye!